Kemi wiped the sweat from her brow as she carefully arranged cassava and okra on the wooden table at her market stall. Her clothes, though faded with age, were neat and smelled faintly of river soap, and her hands bore the calluses of a life lived in hard labor. Every copper coin she earned went straight toward medicine for her ailing mother back in their clay-roofed hut. The sun blazed overhead like a vengeful god, but Kemi never complained. Struggle had long become her companion. As she worked, she noticed the same figure again, the blind man who sat quietly near the market entrance, a carved walking stick in hand and worn cloth draped over his shoulders. His eyes were hidden behind dark lenses, and a small gourd bowl lay by his feet, always empty. Children hurled pebbles at him as they laughed cruelly, yelling, "Go away, useless old man." Kemi's heart clenched. She marched over, shooed the children off with firm hands, and scolded, "Leave him be." The blind man said nothing, only dipped his chin in shame. Kemi sighed, reached into her basket, and dropped a piece of maize bread into his bowl. "It's not much," she murmured, "but it's something." The man stayed still for a moment, then bowed his head slowly. "Thank you," he said, his voice no louder than the rustle of dry leaves. As Kemi returned to her stall, the wind seemed to carry whispers behind her. "Look at her, foolish girl," one vendor sneered. "She can't even afford medicine, and she's feeding strangers." Another chimed in, "Her mother's dying at home, and she's wasting food on a beggar." Kemi kept her back straight, pretending not to hear, but every word sank deep into her spirit. Still, each day, she found a way to bring a little food. To the blind man, it simply felt right. One day, her Aunt Tayo stormed into the market, her face stern as iron. "Kemi," she snapped, "why are you always near that beggar?" Kemi lowered her gaze. "He's hungry, Auntie," Tayo scoffed. "Let him starve. You should be thinking about how to save your mother, not playing saint to the street." Kemi's voice was soft but steady. "I can't just ignore him." Aunt Tayo grabbed her arm, squeezing hard. "You think kindness will save you? Your mother is on her deathbed, and you're feeding a blind fool." Kemi bit her lip to hold back tears. That night, as she sat beside her mother's frail frame, she whispered, "Mama, I promise, I will find a way." Her mother smiled weakly and whispered, "You have a kind heart, my daughter. Don't let this world turn it to stone." The next morning, Kemi opened her small pouch. Only a few coins remained, not enough for even a half dose of herbs. When she reached the market, the blind man was seated in his usual place, but something felt off. As she placed a piece of bread in his bowl, she noticed how smoothly his hand reached out, no fumbling, no guessing. His fingers landed right on the bread. Her eyes narrowed. She watched him closely. He remained still, blank-faced. "Are you truly blind?" she asked, before she could stop herself. The man tilted his head slightly, a faint smile on his lips. "Does it matter?" Kemi blinked, unsure what to say, but before she could speak, a voice cut through the crowd like a whip. "Kemi, come here." It was Aunt Tayo. Kemi hurried over, and her aunt pulled her aside. "I've arranged a marriage for you," she said. Kemi's heart dropped. "With who?" "Chief Okuda," Tayo replied, eyes gleaming. "He's old, but rich. His bride price will save your mother." "No," Kemi gasped. "I won't marry him." Her aunt's smile faded. "You'll do as I say. Do you want your mother to die?" Kemi's eyes filled with tears. "There must be another way." Aunt Tayo slapped her so hard her head spun. "There's no other way. You're nothing but a burden. At least now you'll be useful." Kemi ran from the market, her breath shallow, heart thundering. That evening, she sat by the riverbank, sobbing quietly, feeling like the whole world had turned its back on her. Then came footsteps. The blind man stood nearby, leaning gently on his stick. "How did you find me?" she asked, wiping her face. "I may not see with my eyes," he said gently, but I hear more than most think." Kemi looked away. "You shouldn't be here." The man sat beside her without a word, and they sat in silence until he finally said, "Sometimes those closest to us carry the sharpest blades." She turned to him, startled. His words felt like he had peered into her very soul. "Who are you?" she whispered. He gave a faint smile. "Just a man, watching the world." The next day, when Kemi returned home, she found her mother's breathing more shallow, her face even paler. Kemi rushed to get her remaining coins to buy medicine, but when she checked her hidden pouch, it was gone. Aunt Teo stood in the doorway, arms folded like iron bars, her expression carved in stone. "I took it," she said coldly when Kemi looked for her missing coins. "Now you'll have no choice but to accept Chief Okuta's proposal." Kemi's knees gave way as she stumbled backward. "You killed her," she whispered, her voice cracking. Her aunt only shrugged. "Life is cruel, girl. Best you learn it now." That night, Kemi held her mother's fading body in her arms as she took her final breath. The funeral was quiet, small, unattended by most, and Aunt Teo didn't shed a single tear. When it was all over, Kemi searched the marketplace for the blind man, but he was gone. No one saw him leave. Not a footprint, not a whisper remained. Yet something inside her stirred. He wasn't who he claimed to be, and something told her, deep in her spirit, that she hadn't seen the last of him. Days passed, and Kemi sat in silence in a corner of the mud-walled room, eyes blank, as Aunt Teo paced like a hawk in a cage. "Chief Okuta arrives tomorrow," her aunt barked, each word sharp as broken glass. "You'll wear what I give you. You'll smile. You'll agree." Kemi's lips trembled, but her voice stayed firm. "I won't sell my dignity, even if we starve." Aunt Teo stopped and turned slowly, fire burning in her eyes. "Dignity?" she hissed. "What has your dignity ever fed you? Just hunger and disgrace." Kemi stood up, fists clenched. "I'd rather suffer than marry a man old enough to be my grandfather." Her aunt, without missing a beat, tucked the key to the house deep inside her wrapper and said coldly, "This house is mine now, and you'll sleep wherever I say until he pays your bride price." Kemi didn't argue. There was nothing left to defend. Her mother was gone, the home already sold while her tears were still fresh. And now her aunt was parading her through the village like a goat ready for market. By midday, the whispers had begun. "She's being sold to that old chief. Her aunt is clever, turning death into dowry." Kemi kept her head bowed as laughter followed her footsteps, but Aunt Teo made sure her shame was visible to all. "Better to be a rich man's wife than a hungry girl with pride," she declared in the marketplace, waving as if blessing a bride. Each word stabbed, but Kemi swallowed them like bitter roots. She had no choice. That evening, Aunt Teo flung a torn wrapper at her feet. "Be ready. You'll serve at the festival tomorrow. Let them see how useful you can be." Kemi picked up the cloth without speaking, but behind her quiet eyes, a storm was forming. And then, just before nightfall, she heard a whisper pass through the market. "Did you hear? The blind beggar vanished." "Vanished? They say." "He was never blind at all." Kemi froze. Her heart pounded like a talking drum. They were talking about him, Fair, the man who had disappeared the same night her world unraveled, the man who wasn't who he said he was. Her fingers tightened around the ragged cloth. Let them laugh. Let Aunt Teo humiliate her. But deep inside, Kemi knew this story was far from over. The festival came quicker than she expected, and at sunrise, Aunt Teo was already barking orders. "Tie that wrapper properly. You may be nothing but a servant, but at least look presentable." Kemi's hands moved slowly, wrapping the faded cloth around her waist, each knot a symbol of what she was being forced to endure. Drums echoed across the village. Guests arrived in flowing garments, gold glinting beneath the sun, while the poor bowed and served. Kemi weaved between them with a tray of drinks, each step a reminder of how far she had fallen. "Faster, girl." A woman snapped as she passed. Kemi ignored her. She had learned silence was safer than pride. But no amount of silence could prepare her for what came next. As she turned toward the heart of the courtyard, her eyes caught sight of someone entering the festival grounds, and her breath caught. It was Fair, but not the beggar she remembered. No dust-covered robes, no wooden stick, no hidden eyes. He moved like a panther, quiet, precise, commanding. Dressed in elegant traditional robes, his gaze swept across the crowd like a man used to being obeyed. Kemi's tray slipped from her. Hands cup shattered, liquid splashed across the ground, gasps filled the air. "Useless girl," Aunt Teo shrieked from across the square. "What have you ruined now?" But Kemi didn't hear her. She was staring frozen as Fair turned his head slowly, as though drawn by her gaze. Their eyes met. Time collapsed. The noise of the festival disappeared. And in that moment, every wound, every humiliation, every broken piece of her rose to the surface. Fair didn't gloat. He didn't smirk. He simply smiled. Calmed out as Fair began walking toward her, the murmurs around the courtyard thickened like smoke, curiosity twisting into whispers that cut through the festival air. Kemi's heart pounded so fiercely it drowned out the sounds of music and laughter. She couldn't move, frozen not by fear, but disbelief as the man she once fed like a ghost now approached her like a king. Aunt Teo's fingers clamped down on her arm, hissing, "Don't embarrass me more than you already have." But Kemi didn't hear her. Fair, now only steps away, looked nothing like the beggar who once sat by the market gate. The crowd fell silent, even the drums lost their rhythm. "Come," Fair said softly, his voice deep, calm, and no longer that of a forgotten man, but one accustomed to being obeyed. Aunt Teo snarled and yanked Kemi back, snapping, "She's busy, go find someone else to bother." But Fair's gaze met hers with such quiet authority that even Aunt Teo's face flickered with a hint of fear. "I wasn't asking," he replied, not with rage, but with a weight that silenced everything. And Kemi stepped forward, her knees weak, but her will rising higher than ever. He led her away from the eyes and murmurs to a shaded tree at the edge of the courtyard, where only the breeze dared interrupt. Kemi's thoughts spun like leaves in a storm, questions clawing to be asked, but her voice would not come. Fair finally broke the silence. "You must wonder who I really am." She looked up, eyes glistening. "You lied," she whispered. Fair nodded. "I did, but never to mock you." Her tears fell freely now, not just from betrayal, but from the crushing weight of all she had endured. "Why?" she choked. "Why pretend? Why let them treat you like that?" Fair's expression darkened, not with guilt, but with memory. "Because I needed to know if kindness still existed," he said, voice heavy with sorrow. "I lost everything. To people who only saw what I owned, family, friends, even the woman I thought I'd marry. They betrayed me." He looked at her, and his eyes softened. "Then, I met you." Kemi's heart squeezed tight as she remembered the crumbs she shared, the children she shooed away, the cruel words she ignored just to defend him. "I wasn't trying to prove anything," she whispered. "I know," he said gently. "That's why you're here now." Before she could respond, a voice rang out from the heart of the festival. "Fola, the elders are waiting." Fair straightened, gave Kemi one last glance and said, "Stay close. You'll want to hear this." Then he walked back into the crowd, leaving Kemi standing there, trembling, but this time not with fear, with hope. The moment Fair reached the festival center, all of Zuwara seemed to hold its breath. The elders adjusted their robes, the wealthy guests leaned forward, and murmurs flew like restless birds. Kemi stood at the edge, watching. Fair raised a hand and silence fell. Even the wind stilled. "You all saw me," he began, voice like a storyteller before the fire. "Sitting at the market gate, blind, dusty, weak. Shocked gasps whispered through the crowd. Faces turned pale. Some of you threw stones, Fair continued, scanning their eyes. Some laughed, most of you looked away. At Teo's face stiffened, her lips were a hard line. Then Fair looked toward Kemi, but one person did not. All heads turned. Kemi felt their eyes but did not lower hers. This woman, Fair said with pride, gave what little she had. She protected what others ignored. She showed kindness when no one else would. The same villagers who once ridiculed her now stared with wide eyes. Aunt Teo's mouth hung open, her face drained of its usual poison. Fair turned to the elders. I return not as a beggar, but as a man blessed beyond gold. And I choose to honor the only wealth that can't be bought. There was hesitant clapping. A few elders bowed their heads in shame. But Fair wasn't seeking applause. He stepped through the hushed crowd and stood before Kemi. I owe you more than words, he said softly, just for her. But today, I give you back what they tried to steal. Your dignity. Kemi's breath caught, her eyes blurred. Fair extended his hand. For one heartbeat, she hesitated, then slowly, she placed her hand in his dot as Fair began walking toward her. A hush fell over the crowd like a curtain being drawn. Villagers watched with wide eyes, their curiosity sharpening into murmurs, while Kemi's heart thundered so violently, she thought it might burst. Aunt Teo's grip on her arm tightened like a vice, and she leaned in, hissing, Don't shame me more than you already have. But Kemi couldn't hear her, couldn't even move for the man who once begged with a wooden bowl now moved like royalty through the crowd. Fair stopped just in front of her, and for a moment, even the drums in the festival forgot to beat. Come, he said gently, his voice deep and sure, no longer the voice of someone forgotten, but of a man who had always known who he was. Aunt Teo yanked Kemi's arm back with venom. She's busy. Go bother someone else. But Fair turned his gaze toward her with quiet power, and for the first time, Kemi saw fear flicker in her aunt's eyes. I wasn't asking, Fair said calmly, yet with the certainty of someone who'd never needed permission. Without another word, Kemi stepped forward, her legs trembling but her soul steadied by something stronger than fear. Fair led her away to a shaded tree at the edge of the celebration. Kemi's thoughts raced, her mouth dry, her chest tight with questions she couldn't shape into words. Finally, Fair broke the silence. You must be wondering who I really am. She met his eyes, voice cracking as she whispered, You lied. He nodded slowly. I did. But never to hurt you. Her tears fell not just from betrayal, but from exhaustion, from grief, from months of buried pain. Why? She asked. Why hide behind blindness? Why let them shame you? His eyes didn't flinch. Because I had to know if kindness still existed. I lost everything, family, friends, a woman I was going to marry, all because they loved what I had, not who I was. His gaze softened as he looked at her. Then I met you. Kemi clutched her hands tightly as she remembered. Every piece of bread she had given him, every cruel laugh she had endured to protect him. I wasn't trying to prove anything, she said softly. I know, he replied. That's why you're standing here now. Just then, a voice rang out from the center of the festival. Fola. The elders are waiting. Fair straightened, gave Kemi one last look and said, Stay close. You'll want to hear this. Then he turned and walked back toward the crowd. Kemi stood frozen, her chest rising and falling fast, not with fear, but with something new, hope. By the time Fair reached the center of the courtyard, the entire village had gathered. The elders adjusted their robes, rich guests whispered, trying to match the mysterious figure with the beggar they thought they knew. Kemi stood quietly at the edge, her hands trembling. Fair raised his hand and silence blanketed everything. You all saw me, he began, his voice steady and clear. Sitting at the market gate, dusty, blind, forgotten. The crowd murmured, some faces paling as recognition took root. Some of you threw stones, he said, scanning the villagers. Some laughed, but most of you looked away. Aunt Teo shifted uncomfortably. Then Fair turned to Kemi. But one didn't. Every head turned, and Kemi stood firm under the weight of their stares. This woman, he continued, his voice filled with pride, shared her food when she had none. She shielded me when it cost her reputation. She gave kindness without asking for anything in return. The same mouths that once whispered shame now stood open in silence. Aunt Teo's lips were pale, her eyes empty. Fair turned back to the elders. I return today not as a beggar, but as a man blessed with more than gold. I've come to honor the only wealth worth keeping, the kind that cannot be bought. Some clapped, others lowered their heads. Fair did not smile. He wasn't there for their applause. He walked through the crowd and stopped before Kemi. I owe you more than words, he said softly, only for her ears. But today, I give you back what they tried to strip away, your dignity. Kemi's throat closed with emotion. Fair held out his hand. For a moment, she hesitated. Then, slowly, her fingers reached forward and rested in his.